Okay, I think we are now live. It's saying we're live, so I think we're live. Well, everyone, welcome to episode 39 of Flooded Cinema. I'm joined once again by my sometimes co-host, most of the time co-host, Jacaranda Plus, Jacaranda.
Hello.
Um, and today we are discussing Lawrence of Arabia, of course. But let's let's just do a little check-in. How you been? How you been, man? How's life treating
Yeah, I've been alright.
you? Yeah, that's good to hear. A
I'm
man of many
thriving.
words, very loquacious co-host.
I don't know what that word means, but I agree.
Yeah, so
Me Tasmanian, me don't use big words.
that's true. Um, I just need to announce here that I will be posting sometime this week a investigation into the Black Catechumen account, and we will be getting to the bottom of who they really are, and you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. I've been doing some deep digging, some deep investigation, and you'll be shocked at what I have found. So anyone that's listening to the first minute of this, which is 0 people currently, you'll be ready. You'll be ready for when that comes out. I'll reveal the information to you after the show, Jack.
Can you give us a hint on whether they're actually black or not?
Depends on your definition. Depends on your definition. So this is an official warning to that person that if they want to come clean now before the video drops, um, you should definitely do that. You should definitely do that. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to announce really. Another episode of White History Month. I know the uploads have been slow lately, but unfortunately I have gotten a real job, sadly, and so I can't be dedicating my time to my 200 subscriber YouTube channel as much as I would like. But today, of course, we are discussing one of my favorite movies, and I believe it's one of your favorite movies as well, Jack. Lawrence of
Mhm.
Arabia, a World War One movie that does not follow any of the regular war movie tropes really at all. It's pretty much one of the most unique films of all time, I reckon. Um, and it's certainly one of my favorite movies. I don't know. What's your How would you describe this movie? Just like give it a general overview.
I think if you're familiar with what the genre of the historical epic usually is, and you're just familiar with the idea of what this movie is, but you haven't seen it, you'll be very surprised by what it's actually about and
Yeah,
the way the story actually ends up going.
yeah. It's um, it's almost hard to describe this movie just in general terms, but it is, yeah. It's very much just I guess an epic is the best way to
Mhm.
describe it in the traditional sense of what that word means. It is very much a epic story centered around the one man, Lawrence, um, and it was my favorite movie at one point, and it has since been supplanted pretty much only by Andrei Rublev. So um, it is an amazing movie. I think the first time I saw it, I would have been a teenager, and I think pretty much almost every time I've seen it, I actually saw it in cinemas because there's a place near me that puts on old films. So I went and saw it with my dad because this is one of his favorite movies as well. And I remember, yeah, the first time I saw it, just like in a cinema, which I was very fortunate to be able to see it like that. It just, yeah, just absolutely blows your mind. It's not it's not like 2001: A Space Odyssey in that it's sort of trippy or anything like that. But the scale of it, the sort of emotional depths, I suppose, of it, it's just you walk out of it feeling like it is very much an epic movie. And I remember like the next day, I think after we watched it most recently, I watched Whiplash or something, which is a good movie. I like Whiplash,
Yeah.
but because the most recent film I had watched was this. The whole time I'm watching Whiplash, I'm like, this sucks. I was like very negative. I was very unduly negative to Whiplash. But it's just one of those movies where, yeah, the next two or three movies you watch after it are just gonna seem so like just pointless and insignificant by comparison. I think that's a fair overall
Mhm.
summary. Um, what's the first time you watched it?
Um,
If you can remember.
maybe 4 years ago, I think.
Oh yeah, when you were
With
32.
yeah, when I was 32 in high school with my mum.
Very based. Very based. Um, yeah, this movie is very much timeless. I would recommend it highly for someone that's they're not usually they don't usually like older movies because they find them too slow or too
Mhm.
um, I don't know, like just it just doesn't suit their taste. This is a really excellent one to sort of get you into that mindset. I think
Yeah, the 3.5 hours goes very quickly.
it is extremely pacey and not in like a rushed way. I would say the second half feels slightly rushed, um,
Mhm.
but the second half functions more as like a it's like a mirror of the first half in a certain sense, like thematically. I think, or no, maybe
Mhm.
not, but anyway, I think the one thing this movie
Well, there's just
reminds me,
also an element of it being rushed because, like, his career in the Middle East doesn't go out on a bang, really.
yeah,
He sees all of his goals and dreams just slowly dry up.
yeah. Um, the one another movie series or epic this sort of reminded me of vaguely was the Lord of the Rings films. Just
Mhm.
another, just it's another. It's just sort of you get that grand sense of like an epic story, and there's certain similarities, particularly uh, the the ending for the characters between Lawrence and Frodo in a certain
Mhm.
sense. Just you get to the end of their story and they just can't function around normal people anymore because they've just been through so much, they've seen so much. It's not even necessarily that they're permanently black pilled or anything. It's just they just can't um, stop being at war in a certain sense. It's kind of also it reminded me a little bit of which you pointed out this is a sort of a deliberate thing. Um, John Wayne's character in The Searchers.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, David Lean obsessed with that film.
yes, and rightly
It's
so.
I think it's his favorite film.
I think, and that's another movie we'll probably talk about one day. But just to give you a brief rundown, Searchers it follows effectively a Confederate soldier who never gave up fighting in a certain sense, and he's not necessarily damaged by that, but it changes the way he can't he's never at home anywhere, and you get that again with Lawrence and Frodo, and it's yeah, you really get a sense of the journey you go on with these characters. That's sort of the comparison that I can kind of make to some other films people may have seen. I'm pretty sure everyone would have seen Lord of the Rings though. That's listening to this. It's pretty much. I mean I would be shocked if I ever met someone who has not seen Lord of the Rings. When there are people I meet that have not seen the Lord of the Rings films, that's when I know I'm just so old. I'm too old at that point. I just need to end it. Like when Lord of the Rings becomes like Lawrence of Arabia. It's like, oh, it's that old movie that my dad talked about. It's just
Bro, I've seen some of the people talking about the new Lord of the Rings TV show, and it's already happening.
the new TV show. Oh,
Yeah, people getting interested and then going like, "Oh, there were movies before this show,
what? Who? Like
bro."
15-year-olds?
Yeah, because
Oh my
people are on
gosh.
that internet too young.
Oh man, that's just
What's that? That's that tweet. The worst about the internet is, at any point in time, I'm at the risk of seeing the opinions of a 15-year-old.
yeah. It's gonna be brutal. It is gonna be the passage of time is not gonna be kind to anyone, I suppose. Um, I don't know. I don't even know where to start with this. I guess we can start
Yeah,
with the very
it's
beginning.
very difficult.
The very beginning, you have, I think if it's like 5 minutes where it just plays the score of the
Hmm.
film. Um, I don't know if this was a typical thing in the 60s, but I think it certainly was prior to that, maybe in the 20s, 30s or whatever, where going to the movie was much more of a broader experience and much more almost like they tried to emulate going to a play. Because when you'd go to a play, they would play music as people would walk in and get to their seats, etc. Um, and then people would sit, they'd watch the first act, intermission, and this movie has an intermission. They come back for the second act, and yeah, this movie is sort of more in the tradition of older films. I mean, this came out when was it? 62?
Yep. Yeah, 62.
62. Um, but it has a very much a timeless feel to it, which we've already said. But I like that the opening just opens with the black screen and it just plays the score of the film.
Yeah. I
And
think from memory, um, for Doctor Zhivago, he does a similar thing, but instead he has like a static shot there of something.
uh-huh,
I think of some sort of painted wall. He
right.
just plays the theme of that.
Hmm. Um, yeah, and that's, I mean,
Which is a
Lawrence of
movie you
Arabia.
haven't seen.
No, I
Gotta
know.
force you.
I've got to watch that. There's a million movies we got to watch and get through on the show. Um, hopefully, at some point, I'll get fired from my job and be unemployed again for 6 months. So I can focus on my podcast career. um, but yeah, the score of this movie is probably the best score of any. It's probably my favorite score of any movie.
If I go to like my personal taste, like then yeah, probably is the best. My favorite is Jason the Argonauts. I love the score for
Ah,
that
yeah.
movie.
Man, I haven't watched that movie in ages.
I watched it the other day
Oh,
because
really?
I used to watch that movie on repeat as a kid, and
Oh, very
I
nice.
drove my parents insane because that movie's too old for them, and I used to just
This
watch it all
ex-
the
this
time.
explains so much about you that you were just watching Jason of the Argon and the Argonauts. Like, it's very based origin story. Mm. I guess we should do that at some point as well. But yeah, amazing score. Do you
Do a
want?
Ray Harryhausen.
Yes. Do you want to give it the little tidbit on the behind the score? Your little
Oh yeah,
tidbit.
basically the dude who actually made it was only meant to do a section of it because it was split up into three separate uh composers were doing different
Mm.
parts of the score, and then I think yeah, it was Maurice. I'm not sure if you say his last name, Jaye or something like that. Who was hired to do the dramatical score. Then Aram Khachaturian was handled the Eastern theme music, and Benjamin Britten was to provide the British Imperial music.
Yep.
But then neither of those two could actually do it, and then they hired Richard Rogers to fill in the music that they couldn't do. But when they heard his music, they didn't like it, and
Yep.
so the first dude, Maurice, he was hired to do the rest of it, and he only had 6 weeks to
Yeah.
do the rest of the music. It was meant to be divided up with
Yeah.
3 people.
Yeah. So
So the quality that he achieves, you know, in that time period, and not even having been meant to do it in the first place, is incredible.
yeah, I think you often find that genius comes out when people are put under like that sort of a pressure
Mhm.
a lot of the time.
Pressure and constraints, because
Yes.
you're forced to be creative about things.
Yes. And this is another little interesting tidbit about the movie. I don't know if we're even gonna look. It's gonna be like 2 hours before we even start talking about the movie. Um, I found out that in the 1992, I believe it was, maybe. Yeah, it would have been 92. There was a re-release of Lawrence of Arabia, and in conjunction with that, I think they made a TV movie sequel to this movie called Lawrence After Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
and uh,
I'm assuming Peter O'Toole, isn't
no, it's but here's the interesting tidbit from this. Ray Fiennes, that's how you say his name, right?
Rafe, I think.
Rafe Fiennes plays Lawrence, and apparently Spielberg saw the TV movie, liked Ray Fiennes enough, and put him in Schindler's List. And that's how his career got kickstarted. He's like, oh, this guy plays a British officer very well. I guess I'll get him for my movie. And yeah, the rest is history for that movie.
Your
But
favorite film?
my favorite film, yeah, exactly. Andrei Rublev, Lawrence of Arabia, and Schindler's List. The three favorite historical epics. Anyway, let's move on.
I think Schindler's List is pretty epic, personally.
Let's move on. Um, Another one. Brando was going to originally play Lawrence.
Yeah, yeah.
And I love Brando. I recently
Same.
watched a western that he directed actually. Um, and yeah, he's a great actor, but I am very grateful Peter O'Toole got this role. I think he's just got a better he just suited the role
Yeah.
much better. Just that
Even just the way it looks.
yeah, and the way what he brings to the characters, yeah, is
I think
amazing.
there's a certain sort of presence that only an actor as new as he was at the time could bring.
Yeah,
Because this was basically his first film.
yeah.
Because I think it says introducing in the credits.
Mm. He
I
may
think
have had
he'd done some
smaller
small
roles,
stuff. Yeah,
but yeah, and I think yeah, it was a bit of a big gamble. I guess not as much back then. Like people were just happy to go see movies that looked good.
yeah.
You didn't have to have Zendaya play everyone.
And I think by this time he was starting to get sort of people go to see a director's film
Yeah,
because he had David Lean, Hitchcock, Ford, Houston.
yeah.
They were sort of like that.
Howard Hawks.
Yeah, Howard Hawks.
Um, and I guess I don't know. I guess where do we even begin with this movie? I guess let's just go to the beginning. Should we discuss the opening scene? Is that a spoiler?
With Lawrence in
Yeah.
the map painting room.
Yes.
I mean, I suppose we're just going to get into spoilers.
Yeah. So we are going to spoil the movie. I mean, it happens in the first 2 minutes of the film, but
Yeah,
basically the opening of the film, after you get the 5 minutes of the musical introduction, is Lawrence getting on a motorbike and driving very very fast down the road, and then he runs into what is it? A group of people on bikes or something, or is it? I can't remember what does he run into?
in the I'm trying to remember. In the film, it's a group of people, I believe,
Yeah.
but in real life, he was hit by a military jeep.
Yeah,
I
and
think.
basically the movie opens with him dying.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's all like the context of the film is it's in like basically the entire film is almost a flashback, sort of,
yeah,
from this reporter asking about his at his funeral.
yeah, um, yeah. So he dies. Then it cuts to his funeral, and it's just a lot of people, because then you get a reporter talking to various people at the funeral, and they all have a variety of different takes on
Mm.
Lawrence, and you get this impression that he was this enigmatic, powerful figure that like people like didn't really understand. Basically,
Yeah,
is the point of the opening, and you very much yeah get that sense throughout the film. Um, he and then it pretty much cuts to him being in the map room, and
hmm
he worked for effectively he was effectively MI5 more or less, or would you is that unfair?
uh, no, not quite.
You're more the actual history buff than me on this topic, so
As far because what is it? He's working. I think, as far as I'm aware, he was just working for the army as a map painter,
yeah.
and then
Well, it was in
who was it?
intelligence.
Yeah,
It was
you
kind
don't
of
really get MI5 until World War Two
yeah, no, no.
with the
I'm just
Holocaust
saying.
and all that.
I'm sort of saying it's like the World War One equivalent. I mean, like,
Sorta, yeah.
I mean, and
He's doing intelligence work, yeah,
I mean, yeah, and the fact that he's working with Mr. Dryden later on,
of the Arab Bureau, yeah.
yeah, um,
Which is it's like that's a funny sort of thing is all their bureaus, basically ethnicities and countries
yeah,
of how we're gonna deal with them.
yeah, for within the British Empire, yeah. I love um, the sense of the empire you get throughout the film. Like
Yeah.
it, I mean, it's not all positive. I mean, it's not. mm, I mean, it's mostly positive. It's mostly sort of positive to like neutral to positive impression of the empire. It's like it's a relatively apolitical film, which by comparison to any modern movie about a similar topic, it would just be dumping
Well,
on
yeah,
the British.
it's a character study.
Yeah,
Like this movie, like they can talk about Arab freedom and have the main character be almost. It wouldn't be right to refer to him as this, but I suppose in a certain way he would almost be the stroke equivalent of some sort of progressive or
yeah,
someone
yeah.
a
I know
modern
what you
day.
mean.
You know what I mean? It doesn't seem right to refer to him as that.
It's more he's just a romantic.
Yeah.
He's a romantic in the 19th century sense, being forced to deal with 20th century politics, I
Mm.
suppose, of the British Empire. Um, I, yeah, it doesn't really make sense to call him a progressive
No.
in the because his desire
It's more.
for
I suppose what I was trying to say is that if, say, a film about him was made today,
yeah, they would frame it like that.
yeah, and he could easily be framed as that. Is the more accurate way to say it.
Yeah, it's not like he's not exactly looking for liberation for the Arabs. It's more like he wants them to fulfill their like uh, nationalistic destiny in a certain sense, or like their own destiny in
Mhm.
a yeah, their own sort of thing like that. Um,
But you also never really get this moralizing from it against the British Empire either.
yeah,
Really.
yeah. And the other thing I love in the movies, and they talk about it a few times, is you get the sense that um, you get a sense of how much older civilization is in the Middle East compared to
Mhm.
obviously Europe and England in particular. Um, you know, I can't remember. Faisal at one point says something like, we had streets with lanterns when people were living in mud huts in
Mhm.
London, when London was just a mud hut or something like that.
Mhm.
And
And he longs for the gardens of Cordoba.
yeah,
I think he's in Spain.
yeah,
Yeah.
um, yeah. I
Like the Arabs are already living in like almost a post-apocalypse for them.
yeah. It's
Like
it, it
their civilization has collapsed.
yeah. It's because it's basically a collapse of and then it becomes a full on collapse, I guess, after the Ottomans
Yeah.
fall. But it's yeah, you do get a sense of the historicity in a way that's very very unique. Again, it reminds me a little bit of Lord of the Rings, of like
Mhm.
when you have the humans interacting with the elves, and the elves are kind of this is kind of a silly analogy, but just the way the elves talk to the humans, it's like you just like don't they just have no context for what uh, the elves' history has been, and the elves
Mhm.
sort of are semi dismissive of the
Mhm.
humans in Lord of the Rings. And in the same way, the Arabs are almost dismissive of the British.
Mhm.
Like they see the British as I don't know, just another
They have a
person.
context for what can happen to an empire.
Yeah,
They are the remnants of a collapsed empire, basically,
yeah,
and so they sort of have this smug in a way, knowledge of what will eventually happen to the empire because
Mm.
they're very much aware that all of empires eventually collapse.
Yes, and of course, by the time this movie comes out, the British Empire has collapsed.
Yeah,
um, yeah, which is kind of it is yeah kind of it is a weird almost like the Arabs view the British as almost naive, or they do view them as very naive in within the context of the film. Um,
Mhm.
and I
But then you
think
also get Arab naivety regarding the modern world
yeah,
because they can't even. I mean, this is sort of jumping ahead, but later in the film, with that Arab council attempting to even run
yeah,
in any way a modern city,
yeah, yeah,
that
that
they
that
don't even
fits
know
great.
what a generator is.
That bit is
These
great.
these machines,
Yeah, that
these giant machines with smoke coming out of them.
yeah, I think it's a good movie. It's like a general. It's a very good sort of culture clash kind of movie, and in a very honest and like self-aware sort of way. It's not.
Both cultures are unapologetically their own.
Yeah, and the
Like
movie.
even Lawrence of Arabia is still unapologetically an Englishman.
Yeah,
Like
like he loses himself a little bit in it, but it's not even necessarily that he like goes savage and becomes Arab. It's just he. It's more he loses his humanity kind of at a certain point, and he like reflects on that because it's like for him to lose his Englishness is almost for him to lose his humanity. He doesn't really become Arab, because to do certain things changes him in a way that when Arabs do it, it doesn't affect them in the same way.
mhm.
Um, yeah, it's very much like a cultural essentialist, we'll call it, film. Yeah, it's there's just so much going on. Like I don't even. This is probably going to be an extremely rambling episode. The last few episodes have been a little bit like that, to be honest. I
Mhm.
think when we just have one movie
This is
and it's like
it's a
an epic
difficult
movie.
film to because whenever you start at the beginning, like each scene, when you get into the film, all ties back into something later in the film.
Yeah, and not in a like a cheap way. It's like
No,
it's like thematic, and it because
I mean just say the first scene at his funeral.
yeah,
You get that reporter basically asks every major supporting character
yeah,
that's in the rest of the film what they think about him,
mm,
and then the entire film you just constantly get little bits that make what they say about him then make more sense.
yeah,
Then the ultimate irony comes with, I think it's the American reporter who says something.
negative about him or like
He
flippant.
he gives him compliments, but then he says, "What is it?" He says he was basically the greatest show off I've ever seen.
Yeah,
And then you get that British officer that chastises him for it and says,
yeah,
"I take great offense to what you've said."
yeah,
But then that gets recontextualized as he's a medic
yeah.
who was horrified by the conditions that Lawrence treats
Allowed. Yeah,
the Turks with,
yeah,
but he never realizes that it's Lawrence's fault.
yeah,
And when Lawrence is dressed up as an Arab, he slaps him
yeah,
for it, how
yeah,
they've been treated. And then
yeah,
later in the film, he asks to shake his hand, not realizing it's the same person.
yeah. It's just yeah, it is very dense movie for its scale.
Yeah.
Um,
It does not waste any of its time. This is not
that's
a
the thing.
three and a
Yeah,
half hour film because it wastes time.
yeah,
It's 3.5 hours because it has 3.5 hours
of
of
stuff.
story to tell.
Yeah. Um, it's not like say, not that
Kingdom
I
of Heaven.
dislike the. Yeah, it's well.
Kingdom
Oh,
of Heaven. Kingdom of Heaven
uh,
has Kingdom of Heaven has a 20-minute Redditor YouTube video to tell you about.
Kingdom of Heaven. We've talked about this pretty much every second episode, I swear. But Kingdom of Heaven has got to be the worst movie I've watched in the last 18 months.
Yeah, probably.
Because I mean, at least the other really
The
bad.
sad thing about that is that like the sets, the costumes of that movie. It's like, Mr. Scott, you had so much here,
Yeah. It
and you wasted it on the Redditor movie.
yeah. Kingdom of Heaven is almost the anti Lawrence of Arabia. Like Lawrence of Arabia
Sort of, yeah.
is a very mature. I mean, I don't like to necessarily use the word mature, but it's like an intelligent way of discussing cultures and what it is to be a human and putting it in this ancient Middle Eastern setting. And then Kingdom of Heaven is like, why is there war in the Middle East? Like blah blah blah. Like let's just all get
Oh,
along.
yeah, the attempt to tie back the Crusades to modern day Middle Eastern conflict is hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, as an Orthodox, I mean certainly I'm not going to say that Crusades were all 100% based necessarily, but like it's just there's more nuance to it than obviously Kingdom of Heaven grants it. It's just ridiculous. It
Yeah.
is a ridiculous movie, and I just the oh, yeah. Anyway, whatever. Let's not talk about that
Especially
movie.
when you're dealing with real people. It's like you have an obligation not to slander them.
Yeah.
And that
That
film does
being
not.
said, the brother of Lawrence, the real T. Lawrence, did not
Yeah,
like
that
the
yeah.
film.
Hmm.
I think was it you that told me this? I can't even remember.
Yeah.
Because of the scene with the Turkish gay rapist guy. uh,
It's that scene, and he had a bit of an issue with the overall characterization.
uh huh. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's
But there
uh,
could just be elements of him not wanting to have his brother depicted like that, regardless of whether it's true or not.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would want my a family member put in a 3 hour movie. It would just be weird to watch. Like, it would just be disconcerting to watch, I imagine. So, fair enough. I don't feel like walking away from this movie. It necessarily makes me have. It just makes me want to read the book, The Pillars of Wisdom by
Yeah.
Lawrence himself, and like make a judgment on who he is. Like, I feel like the movie doesn't necessarily set out to be 100% historically accurate.
Hmm.
It is obviously probably a lot more historically accurate than a lot of other films that are made today
Well, yeah.
that are period films. But it more takes his this like interesting historical anecdote from World War I and sort of plays it up to be romanticizes it a little bit, but yeah, I don't feel like it necessarily sets out to make a judgment one way or the other on the person of Lawrence, historical person.
Yeah, I mean, when I first watched it, I didn't come away judging him really.
Yeah,
I mean, um, doing what he did, seeing the things he did, I don't know anybody, especially in the modern day West, that could criticize someone for it.
yeah. I guess we should
And I
probably.
don't know anybody who has seen it that criticizes him as he's portrayed in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should probably explain a little bit, basically, what the. I mean, what is.
Yeah, we've sort of assumed that people have the meta knowledge of who he is. And from what I said, he's not particularly famous in America, so
Yeah. Okay, so the basic rundown is during World War I, when everyone was fighting in Europe.
now for the Americans, what is World War I? Flood?
Well, basically, a Serbian communist slash anarchist slash Satanist killed a Austro-Hungarian monarch for unknown reasons, and that person had anyway. Whatever. No, let's not get in. This is not a World War I podcast. Basically, Germans. What happened was someone killed. What was his name? Franz Ferdinand. But everyone wanted a war. Everyone basically wanted this war to happen because everyone was fighting
Basically,
over Africa, bits of Africa, bits of
so
everyone's.
basically, the Rothschilds wanted to kill Tsar Nicholas II.
Okay, well the high school history version of the events. Let's just give that a version of events.
Let's not, because
Um,
I don't think they need
everyone, I'm just gonna do it. All
it.
these European countries, they reached their like colonialization max point, and at that point they had to start taking over each other's territory. Like all of Africa had been colonized, all of the bits of Asia worth taking were colonized. um, more or less. And so it was sort of like, well, we can't fight any more brown people. I guess we have to start taking over or fighting over other bits of land that other people have taken over. Is that a fair way of putting it? Would you say, or
I would say that that's a fair way of putting it.
so? Uh, yeah, World War One. And anyway, there was the
And
theater.
Winston Churchill made the mistake of impounding Ottoman warships that they had paid for, and they said, "Fuck you, we're joining the Germans."
Whoa. But yeah, basically there was the theater in the Middle East where they were fighting the Ottoman Empire. I mean, to be honest, anyone that's going to be listening to this, of the 10 people that might listen to this, you've already, World War One. Like, we're not. I think the audience here is pretty high IQ.
Well, of course they're watching this.
Yeah. So Lawrence of Arabia is set in the Middle East theater of war during World War One, and it's about Lawrence, who was a military officer for the British. It's basically about an Anglo world power uh, funding and supplying Middle Eastern terrorists to take over
What the?
a enemy
What the?
regime.
What?
Yeah,
Oh,
stop me
nah.
if you've heard this one before. Yeah. So it's the age-old trope of American slash Anglos, or I guess Anglos specifically in this case, funding Middle Eastern terrorists to overthrow a enemy regime for strategic purposes. So, story as old as time.
Mhm.
Um. Oh, Iron Duke has entered the chat. Hello, Iron Duke.
He can correct us on everything we got wrong.
Oh no, this is we're gonna do so badly. Um. So that's the very very broad historical context. Um. And yeah, the movie itself, in terms of historical accuracy, it's relatively accurate. Characters basically got rolled into one, so there were much more than that. Just what was the officer that was with him? What was his name again?
It is Brighton, Colonel
Yes,
Brighton, played by Anthony Quayle.
yes. So there were more than just him and Anthony Quayle. Um,
And I believe Sharif Ali is a composite character as well.
yes, pretty much all of the characters were um, multiple historical people just sort of rolled into one for the purposes of making a film more readable.
It's a very common thing because
It's you don't need
there's
50
there's a limit on how
characters.
many characters you can have.
Yeah, yeah, in a movie. And outside of that, I mean, there's it's relatively true. He did help. Um, I think the British weren't necessarily as hesitant in utilizing the Bedouin in fighting as they are presented in the film. Um, and Lawrence was also very much aware of the post-war plans of splitting up the Middle East throughout the whole thing. It wasn't a surprise to him as it's presented in the film. But I think outside of that, it's more or less like, in the spirit of the events.
It is historically authentic.
Yes,
That's
that's a
sort
good
of
way
what
of
you'd
putting
say.
it. That's a good way of putting it. Um, yes, Andrew is saying you have to read Seven Pillars of Wisdom. Yes, I do intend to. I have it on my bookshelf. I will get around to it one day. For today, we're basically just trying to discuss the film. But obviously, we have to give a bit of geopolitical context. So we've done that, and yeah, this has been a very disorganized discussion. Let's have a let's have a look at my. So we've discussed the opening scene. We're 5 minutes into the movie of the three and a half hour film. Okay, and then after that we see him painting maps. We discussed that, and we have
He's paying maps. It's It starts with a shot of of the like the Middle Eastern, camel trade or whatever,
Yeah.
going past the window, and then it like pans it into this dungeon, basically where he's painting maps, which is that's usually used as an example of for directors of how you do visual storytelling. You
Yeah.
start with where this character wants to be,
Yeah.
and then you contextualize him as being kept apart from it,
Yeah.
where he really wants to be. And I think does the window even have like bars on it almost? I'm trying to remember if it does or not.
I believe
Maybe
so.
maybe it doesn't. I forget.
I believe so.
Yeah, and then you
Something like
get the
that.
famous scene where he puts out the match with his fingers,
Yeah.
and then one of the other guys there, one of the Tommies, he says
He tries to do
he
it as
he
well.
tries to do it and he says it hurts.
Yeah.
He asks what the trick is, and Lawrence responds with the trick is not minding that it hurts.
Yeah.
And so that's like the perfect one scene setup for this character.
Yeah.
You get the context of where he wants to be, where he is, and the sort of his personality and his drive
Yeah.
that you know, he doesn't mind that things are gonna hurt.
Yeah. He has a certain sense of adventure and
And you get what is
endurance.
it? The two of them. One of them says that he's balmy, and the other says
Yeah.
he's all right. And then that's the constant thing. In this film is characters either love him or hate him.
Yeah. Yeah. Um.
That this is why this film is so difficult to talk about because almost every scene ties back or supports or contextualizes every
Yeah.
other part of the film.
Yeah. Because the movie is almost like it's like a character. It's a deliberately. It's creating a character study where the point of the character study is that historical figures are impossible to analyze and understand because they com- especially these like uh, towering historical figures, they're just like almost impossible for normal people to comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
So the movie, is just it's very much he is deliberately enigmatic, not in like a uh, not in like a I don't know, like a David Lynch sort of like it's difficult to comprehend sort of way. It's just sort of that's just the nature of who he is. He's not a normal person. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it it's not that he's deliberately obtuse. It's that he is like a person that is set apart. He's a world historical figure. If that's my reading of it at least. He's a great person of history or whatever in the
What's the how would Carlyle put it? A great man of history, I think
yeah, that's
is
right. Yeah,
phrase.
yeah, exactly. In the Carlyle sense. Um, yeah, you could almost imagine a movie like this about someone like Caesar or Alexander the Great kind of thing.
I'm gonna make you watch Alexander.
I'm happy to. I like Oliver Stone. I'm sure it will be better than bloody Kingdom of Heaven.
It's better than it. At least has good stuff in it.
All right, all right, all right. And then at this point, so it's sort of implied he's already Mr. Dryden knows who he is because he was in Cairo prior to the war, I believe.
Yes, I think so.
And Mr. Dryden approaches him, or it's sort of like they already sort of knew each other, and Mr. Dryden, who
Mr.
is
Dryden, by the way, was played by Claude Rains, who was the original Invisible Man,
yes,
which is a very good film.
and they sort of set it up so that he will go and meet with the Arabs.
Hmm. In order to revolt against the Turks.
Yeah, Iron Duke, you are correct. The film does start with him getting killed on his motorbike, but we just that's we've gotten past that scene already, and now we're up to the second scene of the film. So it's taken us 40 minutes to get to the second scene, um, and that's just the way this sort of movie goes. So just letting you know. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Jack.
Yes, basically, like you said, Mr. Dryden, who works for the Arab Bureau, he wants him to go, and I think technically he's going to assess, like figure out whether they should even help Prince Faisal in his revolt against the Turks.
Yeah,
So it's not even he's going to help them; it's he's going to figure out whether they should help them.
yeah. I think we're gonna have to start moving more quickly. Otherwise, I do not want to do a 3-hour episode. I do have to go to bed at some point. Uh, and then yeah, we get the sense that obviously he's already an outsider amongst the British,
Yeah,
just because
yeah, because
he has a
this
different outlook.
is it the scene where when he's going to that meeting, he runs
Yeah,
into the people in the mess,
yeah,
and he upsets their pool game, and
yeah,
they chastise him, and then he walks back and
yeah,
knocks someone's drink onto them.
yeah. That's a little of a comical scene. Um, but then he gets the job and he can go for however many months. Um, and you get the sense from the general that he's not interested in this sideshow of
I think he calls
uh
it a sideshow of a sideshow.
yeah, because he says the Middle Eastern campaign is a sideshow, and then this Arab revolt is a sideshow on the sideshow, obviously. So he's not interested. He doesn't want to waste people's time or energy, so he doesn't even want to send Lawrence. But he gets the time he wants to go, and then he does go on his journey. And um, one thing that was pointed out to me by a video I watched on the film is at the beginning he always has his compass,
Hmm.
and then at a certain point he loses his compass when he sort of is able to read the desert himself. Like he's lost his sort of Britishness in a certain sense. And there's just so many little things like that. And so he starts out his journey. He's still in his British uniform,
Hmm.
and he's got
Which was
his guide.
designed to be too small for him.
Yes, interesting. It did look a little tight on him, so that
Yeah.
actually makes a lot of sense. Um, and he's got his guide, who is of some particular tribe, and they're traveling through the desert, and we get amazing. Uh, the cinematography in the desert is just
Hmm.
is just incredible. It's just so beautiful. It's and they eventually get to. I'm skipping ahead quite a lot here, but we eventually get to a well, and this is one of the best scenes in the movie. Is they're at a well, and nothing happens for like 30 seconds or like for a few minutes, and then they see on the horizon like a figure coming through on the kilometers and kilometers away, and we see a figure like emerging through a mirage, and it is one of the most incredible shots in cinema.
Hmm.
Um, and then Lawrence's guide, who he's befriended at this point because he gave him a pistol. Because giving people guns is obviously seen as a very nice thing to do back in the day, and now people are funny about guns. But anyways, um, and his guide pulls out the pistol, and then is shot by this mysterious figure all the way out in the desert, and then he shoots him, and he comes to the well, and Lawrence is obviously scared of like who is this and blah blah blah, and that's Omar Sharif, and he's dressed all in black, um, and he's an amazing character as well in the film. Like he's sort of Lawrence's close confidant throughout the film.
Hmm.
Uh, and then they have a
He's an
exchange.
educated. He's an educated Arab.
Yeah, and they have a exchange at that point, and we get it's a really great character moment for both Lawrence and introducing um, what's the character's name?
Sharif Ali.
Sharif. That's always confuses me. Sharif Ali is
Yeah.
played by Omar Sharif, um, and yeah, you have a great character moment of Lawrence being upset that his friend got shot, and he says and Omar Sharif says, oh well, he shouldn't have drank at my well because he knows that people of his tribe shouldn't be at the well, and you get a sense from there like how deadly serious the Arabs take their like tribal rivalries.
Yeah,
Um,
which will become a constant. Uh, it's a reoccurring plot point and a constant thing that
yeah,
Lawrence has to fight against,
yeah,
attempting to
and
create this pan-Arab identity rather than
yeah,
the individual tribal identities.
yeah, and we also get some characterization of Lawrence in that he's not necessarily afraid; he's just sort of angry at this guy. Like we see that
Mm.
he is a very, despite his outwardly what we, maybe some might call effeminate nature, he's
Mhm.
not cowardly in the slightest. He's what I would call like an alpha, like effeminate type guy. I don't know if that's a particularly useful term, but it's a character I find really interesting when they have them in films. Is this kind of um, meshing of intellectualism, but still is very um, straightforward and knows what's going on, kind of thing. I don't know. That's
Mhm.
very vague, but you know what? If you've seen the movie,
Yeah,
you'll know what I mean. uh, and then we the Lawrence and Sharif reach a sort of agreement, or where basically, well, does Lawrence? No, Lawrence does not go with him.
no, he doesn't.
He doesn't go with him because he stands by his principles.
Yeah,
And so obviously this guy has just killed his friend, so he's not gonna go with him. So he tries to he makes his own way through the desert at this point. Um, and again, we have more amazing desert shots. And then he eventually
yeah.
gets to where he's supposed to be, and he
Yeah, they get
runs
to that
into Colonel Brighton.
that really great bit in the canyon
Yes.
where he Colonel Bratton calls out to him, and then you get the shot of Lawrence looking around, and then the reaction shot,
Mm.
and then it's just you yourself have to look around because of how wide it is and how
Yes.
far back.
Yes.
And Colonel Bratton's just this little speck, like
Yeah.
2 pixels tall.
Yeah. You really, yeah, and I think that's one thing about this movie is you really get a sense of the geography and how big it is, and I can tell certainly Peter Jackson was massively influenced by this when it comes to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
Um, just so many extremely wide shots of like when the Fellowship are walking around places and things like that. Yeah, you get a similar. It's a sort of similar thing in this film. Just the scale of everything. You get so many wide shots, and they're not just. It's not just a wide shot. It's a shot so wide that you can barely see the actors, like kilometers away from the actor. Like the point of it is to show you at the scale in a irrefutable sense of where this all this action takes place. Yeah, you really get a sense of like the Arabs talk about how they don't love the sand. It's sort of like
mhm.
this necessary evil that they contend with every day, or not even evil. It's like completely. It's almost like Lovecraftian, I guess, maybe in a certain sense, in that it's this force that's completely indifferent to humanity.
It's made them who they are, but they're trying to escape it.
Yeah,
Like I think that's when Faisal talks about the gardens of Cordoba. That he
yeah,
wants to be in Spain.
yeah,
That's where he wants to be,
yeah,
and he hates that
um,
they've had to go back to the desert.
yeah. And he talks about how British people go mad, sort of falling in love with the desert and things like that. Well, anyway, that's jumping ahead a little. No, not too much. Whatever. Basically, after he meets up with Colonel Brighton, they then meet up with the Arab army.
And Bryden tells him to stay quiet, basically,
Yeah,
because Bryden doesn't want Lawrence messing up what he's doing.
yeah. Um, and then they do meet Prince Faisal, who, uh,
Played by Alec Guinness,
yes, of course, Alec Guinness. Um,
I think one of his 3 blackface roles.
yes.
Which is that it actually looks decent. Like it's not
It
bad.
looks pretty good because he has some quasi-Semitic features, and also the fact that
He has a sort of long face.
he has a long face, big nose, and also the fact that he's an aristocrat of the Arabs
Mhm.
um, makes his look feel less absurd, I suppose.
This is I mentioned it too when we watched it, but in one of David Lean's later films, A Passage to India, Alec Guinness plays an Indian man, and for
Yeah,
some reason, him playing like this tubby Indian man is more convincing than him playing an Arab.
he's more
I don't know
convincing in
why.
that, you reckon?
Yeah, he's a more convincing Indian. He is an Arab. I don't know why.
Oh, fair enough.
For some reason, it looks more convincing.
When I was a when I first saw this film, I didn't notice that he was not uh, Arab. But then, to be fair, I was like 14 or something.
I
So
don't think actually really any of them are Egyptians technically Arabs.
yeah,
They are. I don't know how it works.
yeah, Arabs.
So
Yeah,
Omar Sharif is an Arab, but then Anthony Quinn
yeah.
is a. I think he's a Mexican.
What?
I think Anthony Quinn is he's Hispanic in some way.
No
He's not
way.
a
No
he's not a
way.
Arab.
Damn.
They put a prosthetic nose on him because his nose isn't that big.
Ah, okay, okay.
And so does I think Alec Guinness wears a prosthetic nose as well, slightly.
Ah, okay. That makes sense then. But Faisal is another figure. He reminds me, like, I think it's obviously deliberate. He is extremely similar to Lawrence in that he's this extremely thoughtful, self-aware um, character who is like preeminently aware of the difficulties of like dealing with Arabs, and in the same way, Lawrence is self-aware of the difficulties in dealing with the English,
Hmm.
like of the I don't know what I don't know what you'd call it about the
You
English.
get a sense that when they're talking to each other, they're both aware of the quirks of their respective ethnicities, and
Yes.
they would like to be able to come they would like to be able to come to some sort of agreement between the
Yeah.
two of them,
Yeah.
but they know that just by the way their cultures work, it's basically impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's whenever they're talking, it's very Shakespearean.
Yeah.
You it's almost like they're two Shakespearean characters put into this sort of 20th century conflict.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and it's very interesting, like seeing them then playing off, like Faisal playing off other Arabs and Lawrence playing off other British people, and it's sort of like they just don't get it. They just don't get it what Lawrence is about, or the Arabs don't really understand Faisal in the same sense. But you know, of course, Faisal's the prince, so it's sort of a different dynamic. But still, it's yeah, it's interesting. Um, I don't know how much we cannot do the whole plot, man. We're gonna be here for 5 hours. We need to
Okay,
jump.
so basically,
Yeah, just give the rundown.
during their
Get to the next.
discussion, um,
Lawrence Lawrence
Faisal needs
repeats the
Faisal needs the
Quran.
Arabs to be Faisal needs the Arabs to be resupplied. But they can't figure out a way to do it, and so Lawrence suggests that they do a surprise attack on the city of Aqaba,
Mm-hmm.
which is a coastal city. So the guns all face out to the sea because on the
Yep.
other side is a desert. I forget what which it's the Nefu Desert is what it is, which is
Yes.
basically inhospitable, and
Yes.
you know that it was thought that no one could cross it basically.
Yeah, and it's very much. It reminded me of like how the Japs took Singapore
Hmm.
because the guns were all facing the other way, and then they just rode in on bicycles. Similar sort of thing. That's the story, right? Of Singapore.
I have no idea, but I
Um,
do know the Japanese did ride around on bicycles
I'm sure
because
I'm sure
it
Iron
looks funny.
Duke will correct me if I'm wrong. Uh, Iron Duke in the chat says, "I think the first two thirds of Lawrence Arabia are better than the last third." I think
I'd
the
say they're more
goal,
sort of entertaining in terms of like,
yeah, I think the goals of the first two thirds are distinct from the last third, because the first two thirds is about Lawrence. It's like him kind of the grass is greener on the other side. It's like him thinking being Arab is like, oh great, to a certain extent. And then the last third is sort of him
I mean, in terms of the fact that
maturing.
the Arabs are never going to get their independence.
Well, that and it's just like him maturing and realizing that cultures. Okay, many of the Singapore could actually fire inland. Okay, I'm okay. That's clearly that must be a myth then. But anyway,
You
so the
see, it was just the power of the bicycles alone that did it.
yeah. But
That was the trick. The British didn't have bicycles.
the the last part of the last third of Lawrence of Arabia is very much, I think, just showing up the sort of almost the naivete of Lawrence, and that it's
His romanticism is
yeah,
not.
it is bringing him into the 20th century,
Mm.
very much, um, and just sort of
Which is by its nature just not going to be as entertaining as
yeah, because it's a de-romanticizing
yeah.
um, part of the film. I think it is less entertaining, obviously, um, but it reminds me in some respects of that last section in Andrei Rublev, which we won't spoil. But it's that kind of section of the film which sums up and sort of recapitulates everything that happened previously and contextualizes it in a new way, I guess.
Mm.
The British did not have tanks, unlike the Japanese. All right, we can't get too distracted on discussing World War Two during the Lawrence of Arabia discussion. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My history buff is not there. I went to Singapore, and that's what everyone told me is the Japs rode
That's
in
what
on
that's what the
bikes, and
Singaporeans
in
told
their
me.
very basic, in their museums, that's what they told me. So maybe
Well, that
they were
is true. The,
simplifying it
the
for
Japanese did use
dummies.
bicycles.
They were simplifying it for dummies like me. Um, but let's not get too hung up on that. Yeah, and then the film is then them traveling through the desert. Like there's a few of I can't remember how many men he takes with him, but
50.
yeah. So then they travel through the desert, and this is one of the greatest sequences. I mean, the thing is, every sequence in this movie, it's like one of the greatest sequences of all time, pretty
Yeah.
much. But them traveling through the desert is amazing, and obviously
I
one,
suppose you should say he picks up two
yeah,
orphan boys as his personal
as his
servants, or
squires,
because they'll
effectively.
come later.
Yeah. So he has two squires, effectively. And at one point during the journey in the desert, one guy falls asleep, falls off his camel. No one notices until like half a day later. And then Lawrence says, I'm going to go back and save him. And everyone tells him, don't go, don't go. Um,
What is it? It's written, which is another common thematic thing. This man's
yes.
death is written.
Yeah. And yeah, Lawrence goes back and saves him, which is great. And then he gets back and he says, nothing is written,
Mhm.
effectively. Um, and doing that really energizes Omar Sharif into basically completely believing in
Yeah.
Lawrence. Um, like he no longer sees him as just this kooky British guy that's sort of larping. He actually develops genuine respect for him. And what's guy's name? Kasim is the guy he saves.
Gassim, I think.
Qasim, yeah,
It begins with a G, but I think the way Arabs say it sounds like Gassim.
yeah, Qasim. And then they meet up with another tribe of Arabs, and they eventually manage to recruit that tribe. But that tribe and the tribe that
Although
Lawrence
we
is
should
with.
say, after Lawrence rescues Gassim,
Oh yes, yes,
they give him his clothes,
yes.
his
That is an
his Arab
yes,
clothes.
because so at that point, yeah, he's effectively being completely
They
accepted
yeah,
by the Arabs, and they give him a fully white outfit, which you see a little picture of in the thumbnail there. And obviously Omar Sharif is completely in black, and they're not necessarily like opposites the characters, but it's kind of like they're um, they are played off each other in a certain
they're
way.
they're complementary, sort of yin and yang sort of thing going on.
Yes, yeah, which is great. And yeah, it's a really funny scene where he gets his clothes and then he's sort of riding around. He's just very happy, and then he's sort of dancing around to them, and then some Arab guy comes up to him and he's like, looking at him like, "What are you doing?" And he gets embarrassed, which is pretty funny. But yeah, for basically, we're skipping ahead very quickly now. They then recruit another group of Arabs.
They recruit the guy that finds him. That's what
Yeah,
they do. Yeah.
they appeal to his vanity, basically. Um,
'Cause he's one of the he's the Arab that lives on the other side of the Nefu Desert,
yeah,
but he's been paid off by the Turks not to attack them
yeah,
because he just wants gold,
yeah. So they
and so
appeal to
they can just
his
pay him
greed
off
and
like a
vanity.
Viking, and he just
Yeah,
leave him alone.
yeah. So they then recruit him into the army. They then take Aqaba,
Hmm.
um, and
Oh, we should say before the attack, this is how dense this movie is.
yeah.
Before the attack, one of Sharif Ali's men kills one of
Oh
this other guy's
yeah,
men,
yeah,
and so not knowing who it is, because of the way blood feuds work in Arab culture, Sharif Ali would have to kill one of this guy's men,
yeah,
which would then create a blood feud between them.
yeah,
And so Lawrence offers to kill the man himself so that the two tribes aren't involved.
yeah,
And then it's revealed that the man who has to execute is Gassim, the man he rescued. And he shoots him anyway.
yes. And that sort of ties back into them saying, "Oh, it is written, it is not written." So
Yeah.
ultimately, that guy's death was written in a certain sense. Like the movie does kind of, in a certain sense, almost doesn't endorse a kind of fatalism and essentialism,
Hmm.
especially in the ending when it becomes much more pessimistic. We've got Andrew saying, "Gents, don't mind my saying, but I am the only person watching this. I just put that. That's okay. That's okay, Andrew. We don't. The reason I'll explain this to you. The reason I do this as a live stream is because I am too lazy to record it and then upload it. When I do it as a live stream, it just immediately goes up onto my channel, and it saves me the middle step of having to upload it. And it also, every now and then someone does listen to it, but live, or you seem to listen to it live, which is nice. Um, but yeah, it is mostly just my laziness is the reason I do this live, to be perfectly frank. So if no one is watching, that is that is not the end of the world to me. But yeah, thank you, Iron Duke.
We do this for you.
Yes, we do this for fun. This is our hobby. Talking about movies that no one will listen to the discussion or watch the movies, but that's just how it works. Um, yeah, so that plays into the fatalism of the film. Like the whole time, Lawrence like wants to be more Arabic, but he doesn't realize that that comes with the catch of this tribalism and blah 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 blah.
Mhm.
He thinks like he can sort of wrestle both sides, but he doesn't understand that in doing that he's trying to make the Arabs not Arab anymore.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but anyway, that's sort of like what happens with that bit. Like he, so that the film is like surprisingly fatalistic.
Well, I mean, like the whole thing with Gassim is a microcosm of the rest of the plot of the film, where he's trying to desperately
Yeah,
get the Arabs to create this this own country,
yeah, and then
but he's just constantly going up against the inevitability of them being divided by the French and the British.
yeah. Iron Duke has now said at Flooded Basement, you need to give things a little pre-publicity. You're right. I should if I'll be honest, Iron Duke. This is more of a just like a little minor side hobby of mine. I'm not that interested in building up my channel too much.
You need to be
Um,
grinding
but we'll
that
see.
that
Maybe when I have a bit more
this
time,
view.
maybe in a month or two, I'll have a bit more time to be starting to crank out these episodes more frequently. And in when I get into a stage where I can do this more on a schedule, I will try and do more publicity and build it up and make it more
Not put the
professional.
links in the tweets because Twitter.
Yes, I will try and do that. But for now, we're still perfecting the formula. We're still perfecting the formula, you know. What you can't start selling a product until you've got a good product. The product, we're almost there with that. We're almost there. Um, I think. So yeah, that's my ambitions as of right now with my YouTube career. uh, yeah, and that's so. Then the movie, they've taken over Aqaba, and then it's the bit where he returns back to Cairo, correct? Basically,
Uh,
or is there the intermission?
he goes back and then it's intermission.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's after he gets back, because then the whole first half is very much like a full circle.
Yep.
Yeah, and then so they've taken Aqaba, they've taken this
He,
Turkish
yeah, he, they
base.
take it, because Lawrence had told this guy, played by Anthony Quinn, the other Arab leader, that there'd be gold there. And then when they get there, there's only Turkish money.
Yeah,
There's only Turkish paper currency which he can't use. Um, and then he has to head to Cairo, yeah.
yeah,
And they cross the Sinai Desert, I think.
yeah,
And
and
on the way, one of his servants dies in quicksand.
yes, um, which is a pretty horrific scene,
Yeah,
and it shows that
this small child.
it shows as well he's already changed his attitude because previously he rescues Gassim who gets lost in the sand, and now this time he's realized that when the desert wants to take someone, you just let the desert take that person effectively.
Hmm.
Like he's given into fatalism a little bit at that point. Um, and then they do get to Cairo, and he's just like super black-filled, basically.
He looks like shit.
Yeah. And then they walk in, and he's in his Arab garb, and they're like, "You can't come in here." And then they realize he's a white guy, so they just sort of let him in, and he goes to the bar, and he gets what is it, like a lemonade or something for
I
the
think they call him a wog,
yeah.
which I didn't even know you call Arabs wogs.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty funny. Um, and yeah, it's again it's a playing off of like showing him because the first half of the film is it's sort of like yeah his character transformation and he's back now at the soldiers mess where he was before and he was kind of awkward and like people were annoyed at him and now he comes back like this conqueror but he's not necessarily that proud of it in a certain sense like the thrill of the victory is gone in like losing his squire and just sort of realizing he was kind of naive about certain things
Mm. And then
and
he confesses that he enjoyed executing Gassim,
yeah yeah
which is one of the one of the things he's troubled by the most in the film is that he sort of enjoys it to a degree.
yeah um, and then it's intermission basically because no the thing just before it's Mr. Dryden and the general talking is it and then it's intermission basically they just like discuss things very quickly
I think Lawrence asks them about the British taking Arabia,
yeah
and then Dryden sort of says some politician spin, basically, like, don't worry about it. And then they go on that sort of walk down the stairs, and it's quite an extended sequence, and then it gets into the music, and then it
yeah
fades into the intermission. Yeah.
yeah and yeah I like having the intermission I think it sort of gives gravitas to the first half of the film and sort of builds up the second half. It's kind of like it makes the movie feel almost like you're watching a double feature in and of itself.
Hmm. Well,
Um,
it's from a time when going to see a film was an actual experience.
yeah,
Like, it gives you a chance to think about what's happened in the first half
yeah,
of
which
the
I
film.
really, I really like it. Yeah, and it was
And
good
it's
as well
also an
when we
excuse
watched
to
it.
have just more of the school,
Yeah,
just to
well,
play.
it was good as well. It gave me a chance to go to the toilet and everything when we were actually watching it. I used it as an actual intermission, which was good. Um, yeah, and then we get into the second half where events move even more quickly. I'm trying to think. So does it?
It starts with him
The train
blowing up the
sequence,
trains. Yeah.
yeah, which is a great, really fun little. Well, it's not super fun necessarily, but it's yeah, it's just
I
showing
love
them.
killing Turkish people.
It's just like them just doing terrorism, just like blowing up,
It's
just like blowing up Turkish train lines and stuff like that, and robbing the
not terrorism, it's
trains.
guerrilla warfare. Okay.
Yeah, okay, well, whatever. Um, and
When
you
the
sort of,
people I like do it, it's guerrilla warfare. When the people I don't
yeah,
like doing it, it's terrorism.
yeah. Well, yeah, they basically. It sort of shows how that side of the war has. Oh, yeah, and the American reporter. We
The
have.
worst character in the film.
Yes, yes. I remember. What was I even saying about him? I was
You were just
being,
constantly saying how much you hated him.
yeah, I was going
You just
off
want
on
him
it.
to get off screen. You want him to die.
I was saying very anti-American things when that character was coming on because I think the because that character effectively was trying to create propaganda to bring the Americans into World
Yeah,
War One.
yeah, yeah.
So he was just like a pro-war
He he
propagandist.
he admitted that he was looking for something that wasn't depressing, but was like a fun adventure
Yeah,
to try to convince Americans that it was all just a fun heroic adventure in World War One.
yeah. And he's a perfect example of people always talk about, or not everyone, but like a lot of people talk about how journalists got bad in the
Oh
only
yeah,
recently. Journalists were only bad after say the 80s or 90s when they got blah 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 blah. Journalists have always been scum. All right, that's my bottom line. They've always been scum.
at least the majority of them.
Yes, I mean obviously there are exceptions, but generally they are scum. Like Kierkegaard, all right, if you're familiar, he has that famous quote where he says something like, "If my daughter was a prostitute, um, I would, still pray for her soul and hope she turned herself around. But if my son was a journalist, if he didn't give it up after 3 to 5 years, I would just give up on his soul." Something like that. So look, journalists, like there are obviously exceptions. There are,
If you are an independent journalist, like
yeah,
if you are an actual like you genuinely believe in journalism,
yeah, like Keemstar. He's a good example of a he's a good example of an independent, hard-hitting journalist. But no, but it's just yeah,
I more meant like Julian Assange.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's
Wait, can
just
we say his name? I don't know if you can say his name on YouTube.
oh no, we're gonna get black.
I won't say it again. I won't say it again.
We're gonna get black bagged. We're gonna get banned.
I don't know what the rules are on
Yeah.
YouTube about saying people's names.
Um. Yeah. But anyway, there
If you are
are
a journalist that hates other journalists, if you're a
yes,
journalist that thinks journalism is bad, then you're probably good. You're probably solid.
yes. Um. I obviously yeah. Journalism in and of itself isn't always bad, but it's like
The
90,
concept
let's call it
of
99% bad.
the concept of telling people about what's happening is not bad.
Yeah.
However,
Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, so that movie has that in it. It's like it's subtle, but it's done in a way that seems kind of red pilled about journalism, the journalism question.
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, like maybe it's just I just hated that character so much.
I think it just presents a character
Yeah.
as the character is.
Yeah. 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 He's just sort of a journalist, and he's sort of um, you can see he's sort of questioning the morality of Lawrence, but at the end of the day, he's gonna write
Yeah, but he
like
wants a good story though.
yeah, he wants a story. Iron Duke said, mainstream media cannot lie straight in bed. That's so true. Um, yeah, so he gets introduced. He's annoying. Less said about him, the better. But the second half, or this last third of the film, it's much more episodic at this point. It's not following one sort of campaign or one sort of lead up to one particular battle. It sort of jumps around a lot more. So it opens with these train. It shows what the army's been up to, and slowly over time the army has been diminishing because eventually people like the Arabs get sick of it. They have no
The Arabs take their loot and leave.
yeah basically, and so there's only the die-hard Arab nationalists left in the group, and then they go to I can't remember what city is it they go to that he gets captured at.
Dara.
Dera and
Yeah, I don't know if that's
Lawrence
how you pronounce it, but something like
and
that.
basically what was their goal in going there?
He just wanted to scout the city
Right. So he just wants to scout the city, but then he gets captured and is sodomized, basically.
because he's the most obvious white dude in the world.
Yeah. And they think, but the thing is, they don't realize he was a. Well, so yeah, he gets sodomized, basically. I mean, the movie doesn't show it explicitly, but it's it's implied. And it's very much this event.
I think officially he was just flogged.
Oh, okay.
Is what happens.
The movie implies that. I don't know if the movie is taking liberties at this with this or
Well, the movie basically just says that this Turkish dude is a homosexual,
yeah.
and then it sort of implies that Lawrence might have enjoyed whatever happened.
Um. Uh-huh. Iron Duke is letting us know. A lot of people think Lawrence made up at least some of his capture by the Turks.
Mhm.
Like, just made it up. Yeah, not sure about that, but
I have heard that as well.
yeah. Thematically, the capture scene is sort of the other big turning point in the film in terms of Lawrence's attitude towards the war. It's when he sort of gives up on it as well, to a
Mhm.
certain extent. He's sort of becomes extremely violent and bitter. So he gets let go by the Turks because they don't realize that he's a British officer. They just think he's some random white guy or something. Um, and then at that point they have another sort of campaign across the Ottoman Empire, and he just massacres people.
Yeah, it's the campaign for Damascus.
Yes, that's right. And they just massacre people. And uh,
I think
we are
well, because
jumping
what
in quite a
happens
lot.
is they see a retreating Turkish column,
Yeah,
and they come across this massacred city, this massacred village.
that's right. And then they decide to massacre the Turks themselves, which is not necessarily unfair. Um, yeah, no prisoners. That's what he
Yeah,
says. Yeah. Um, and yeah, that's another great. The last third of the film is like a much more.
it's depressing.
It's just depressing. Like the first part of the film like has dark bits, but it's very much the second half is
Well,
just
the
more.
dark parts are counteracted by Lawrence's personality
Yeah,
and his zeal for what he's doing.
and then the
But
second
then once
half.
that's gone,
Yeah,
it's a depressing spiral.
yeah. It's a surprisingly depressing sort of movie for its scale and epicness.
There's a bit of dark humor that's sort of enjoyable in a way,
Yeah,
especially when you get to the Arabs attempting to run Damascus.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, they do take Damascus, and this is sort of the
Which,
very much
well,
the
they take it in the movie.
yes, yes.
In
Well,
real life,
it was Australians that
it
took it.
was Australian.
But in the movie, the Arabs take Damascus, and this is sort of the. Then you get the part of the film which is very much the thematic coda to the film, like this thing that sort of I don't know, it's a little thing at the end, or the thing that sort of ties things up, where the Arabs are trying to work together and have this city and build a pan-Arab group together, and the British just let them do it, and it's because the British understand that the Arabs are going to fail miserably,
Yeah.
which they do. They don't know how to run the generator. They don't know how to run a
they,
hospital.
they don't know what a generator is.
They cannot run a city at all, and they're all just arguing, infighting, and so the Arabs
And
just leave.
because each different tribe is given a different part of the city to run, and
Yeah,
like a different, one tribe is given the job of like being the firefighters, and then
yeah,
they don't know how to get the water running.
yeah. Um, and there's just in this massive room, and they're just arguing with each other. Um, yeah, it's very it's a good section of the film. It's pretty dark as well, like with the hospital being so grim with the
Yeah.
Turkish prisoners of war and that. Um, and I mean, we've pretty much skipped to the end at this point. What's left that happens?
Um, the Arabs abandon the city, and the British just move in.
Yeah, the Arabs all just leave because they're just like, we can't be bothered running a city or running a civilization at this point.
And then Lawrence is promoted,
Yeah, and it's
and
very
they order
bittersweet
him,
sort of thing.
and then they order him back to Britain because he's not useful to them anymore.
Yeah, and yeah, that's pretty much the end of the movie. Cause yeah, the ending of the movie is him just sort of leaving.
It's him just in a car,
Yeah.
and then he gets overtaken by a motorcyclist.
Yes. Yes, which is a nice little wrap around. I
Mhm.
um I love the ending of this movie because
I
it
The
is
first time I watched it,
so
it annoyed me. So I was like, "What?
yeah.
That's it?"
Yeah. I love how anticlimactic it is. It's sort of just like the nature of history is disappointment. Like this movie is yeah, it's very much about like the nature of history and warfare, and it's just it's it's got so much going for it. Like, have you ever watched the movie Jarhead?
Yes.
There's some similarities with that film. Um,
Jarhead is like if Jarhead is if you took away the first part of this film.
yes,
Jarhead is if you only
is
had the
the second?
second part,
Yes, exactly. That there's yeah. So it's just
but it
like
was even more depressing.
yeah, it's just like war is mostly just boring, disappointing, and like awkward. And
Warriors soldiers get drilled,
yeah,
told to constantly look out for people to shoot, and never actually allowed to fight anybody.
yeah. Um, but yeah, the ending reminded me a lot of Jarhead. That sort of sense of anticlimacticness.
Mhm.
Iron Duke is okay. Iron Duke has said we should review the Light Horseman, one of the last great cavalry
Mhm.
charges, and he's also said I hate the film Jarhead. Uh, fair enough. Fair enough.
That is fair enough. That is
Um,
that is a hard movie to watch.
it's yeah. I'm not necessarily endorse. I haven't watched Jarhead in a long time. I don't know what I'd think of it, but it just this movie reminded
I
me of
think
it.
it's I think it's a good film, but it's not enjoyable in
Yeah,
any way.
yeah. It's just sort
Like
of
I will never watch that movie again.
yeah. It's sort of like the reason that the second half of Lawrence of Arabia works so well is because it's a reflection of the romantic first half.
Hmm.
But Jarhead's just you don't have anything. It's just it's just bleak and boring deliberately. um, yeah, I'm not sure what else. What else have I got to say here? What's the last thing he says? He says, "Thank God I'm a soldier" or something like that.
Um, I do not remember.
Oh well. I think we might as well wrap it up. You know, this was a bit of a disorganized episode, very rambling, but that's going to be the difficulty whenever we discuss one of our favorite films, especially a movie of this size and density.
Hmm.
Is we'd need to have planned out almost like a series of podcasts discussing every single scene, or a series of like videos discussing this movie because it's just that sort
Mhm.
of a film. It's not, we've discussed some good movies like, I don't know, Fight Club or whatever, but it's like at the end of the day, you can just talk about Fight Club. This movie is one of the best movies of all time. I think it's a movie that justifies the entire enterprise of creating films. It's
Mhm.
yeah, beautiful, transcendent. Like you absolutely have to watch it. Um, we've talked about it in such a disorganized way that I feel like we haven't even really spoiled it because it's just so. Um, yeah, difficult. Yeah, Andrew says the first 2/3 is boys are an adventure and the last is 20th century cynic's view.
Mhm.
I think that's a fair way of putting it. But I think they complement each other as like a balance. So the movie isn't necessarily saying one or the other is a superior way of looking at things. I don't think the movie sort of ends on saying, well, you have to be cynical about everything.
I
That's
think
not.
it's more just because it's contextualization as a character study. It's
Yeah, it's
about
more like
Lawrence's
Lawrence's.
views on it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like Jarhead or like complete romanticization like bloody what's that other war movie? You know, Spielberg. Spielberg. Saving Private Ryan.
Same
Saving.
Private Ryan is not a romanticize. That is not a romanticization.
Uh. Oh, I don't know, man. It's
That movie has the morality in that film is all over the place and is completely incoherent. It's impossible to actually figure out what he's attempting to say.
I suppose that is also. I suppose that is true.
Like
I get. I
the
mean,
morality in
I
that
mean,
film is
I wouldn't. I
so
wouldn't call it. I wouldn't
bizarre.
call it romantic. But I mean, that Saving Private Ryan is basically like watching a Call of Duty plot play out in a film.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, but that's a story for another day when we will discuss that film at some point.
Well, we were gonna do that film and the Thin Red Line.
Yes, but then the war broke out in
Yeah,
Eastern
then
Europe, and we were like,
and
it would not have been in good taste.
Comrade Putin.
Yeah,
We forgot to send him the message.
yeah.
You got top
Wait,
guys in Australia where
yes, wait till after the episode of Flooded
yeah.
Cinema comes out. uh, yeah, but look, guys, maybe I will get back to a schedule, and we can start doing more episodes. And
Well, I mean, this was meant to be White History Month, but it's White History
yes,
whatever is happening. Season.
summer, White History Summer. What's White Boy Summer in the Southern Hemisphere? White Boy Winter in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm sure at some point in August. So we still have Master and Commander left to discuss. Iron Duke,
With the special guest.
I
With
promise
the
you,
special guest.
the special guest, Iron Duke. I promise you, it'll happen sometime in August. Uh, yeah, Iron Duke. First 15 minutes of Saving Private Ryan is great. The rest of the film, not so much. That is, yeah, I pretty much agree with that. But yes, we will get to Saving. No, not Saving Private Ryan, but we will do that, I guess, one day. But Master and Commander
One day.
is next on the chopping block, and then after that, I think maybe we'll be able to get to a more regular schedule. We will see. Yeah, we haven't even scratched the surface with this movie, to be honest. I feel like in some ways this was a good episode, in some ways this was not a very successful episode. But it's a testament to the fact that talking about this film is basically impossible. You just have to watch it.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think that's all I've got to say. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to say.
Watch Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah.
And also watch all of David Lean's films.
Fair. Fair.
Even if you don't think you're going to enjoy it, I guarantee you that just pick one of his films and you'll probably end up liking it.
Yeah.
Even his obscure, like early romance films, you'll probably actually enjoy it.
Fair. All right. Well, that's all for tonight. Yes.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.